Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Michael Smerconish. On behalf of the Big Talker 1210, I've always wanted to say this. I get to introduce to you a man who truly requires no introduction. United States Senator John McCain.
Well, Michael, thanks for that long and warm and glowing introduction. It's better than the one I received at the Scottsdale Rotary Club last week where the guy said, "Here's the latest dope from Washington, Senator John McCain." Thank you. Could I just mention I was out in California during the campaign doing a fundraiser for Governor Schwarzenegger. He and I have many similar attributes, as you can tell, and a bunch of protesters and this great big guy with a sign. I walked by, he said, "Hey, anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" And I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Doesn't it just make you mad as heck?" So thank you, Michael, for your kind introduction. Could we congratulate this young man on the enormous success that he has achieved here?
Thank you.
Bringing information, knowledge, and respectful debate to the political arena in America. And finally, I'll stop after saying this. We need a more respectful debate in the political arena in America today, my friends. I respect the views of those who disagree with me. We need a more respectful debate, and none of us were particularly happy at the level of the political debate in the last election.
Thank you very much. We're all privileged to be in your company. We really appreciate you returning. This is the second year in a row that you've graced us with your presence, and somebody said that means that hopefully in 07 and 08 we have you back, and then in 09 we take the whole meeting and we move south 100 or so miles and we do it down there. Senator, what I thought we'd do, as we've done in the past, is allow me to play Oprah for a couple of minutes. We have already more than 100 suggested questions from members of the audience, and maybe at a certain point we'll pass the microphone as well. I want to talk a little current events, and if you don't mind, make reference to some of your books as well, which I've read all of them and love them. Let's start with Iraq. Is civil war a part of your lexicon? Is that how you refer to it?
You know, I think, Michael, a lot of times we get hung up on language. I don't know if it's a civil war. I remember the classic definition. It's one side against the other. Our own civil war, two parties clashing. This situation has obviously multiple people and groups and organizations fighting against each other and killing each other. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for that comment. We were going to... Thank you, sir. We were going to wait until after we finished our dialogue, and then we were going to let you ask your question, and we'll do that if you'll show us some patience, all right? Thank you very much. You know, sir, I'm always curious why it is that we can't have, as I just said, a respectful dialogue rather than this kind of... I think the guy just made my point, but...
The irony of it is, as you know, we're going to pass the microphone, and we've got more than 100. Take up my volume, please. I said the irony is...
I think we're still not hearing Michael here. Get our crack engineering team to work here. Is it on, Michael?
Testing 1, 2, 3. I was simply going to say that the irony is we love the debate and the discussion as long as it's respectful. And whatever it is that was on that gentleman's mind, as far as I'm concerned, is fair game this morning, and I know you feel the same way.
Sure, absolutely.
You wanted to continue your answer in terms of
sure.
the way in which we described
In
this?
other words, I don't think it's a classic civil war. Look, we're in trouble in Iraq, my friends. We are in deep and serious trouble. And there's many books that have been written about the mistakes that were made. I won't chronicle all of them for you. Fiasco, Cobra 2, you've read most of them, as I have too. And we didn't have enough troops over there at the time. That's well accepted now. And unfortunately, we paid a very heavy price for it. Now the question is, what do we do where we are? I don't think the status quo is acceptable. I don't think that this continued deterioration of the situation in Baghdad, you may have seen last week, the Marines' National Intelligence estimates said that Anbar province is not under control. So I believe that we've either got to develop a plan that is different from what we're doing now. I've always believed that one of the lessons of war is the Powell Doctrine. The Powell Doctrine, General Colin Powell, is you go in with overwhelming force and you get the job done, or you don't go in at all. And obviously, we have not been able to gain control of Baghdad and as well as parts of Iraq. Now, I will say, and someone in this room will say, there are parts of Iraq that are fine. The Kurdish area, other areas of Iraq, as you know, you just came back from a trip. But when the capital of a nation of 6 million people is in great disarray, if not chaos, then we've got a serious problem there. And could I just finally mention this study group, Iraq study group, that just reported out, it's exactly as I anticipated that it would. You know, some smart guy one time said, the Lord so loved the world that he didn't send a commission, you know, because you get commissions who have one side ideas, other side the idea, and so what does the commission have to do? Come together with some kind of compromise. Well, in war, my dear friends, there's no such thing as compromise. You either win or you lose. And that's why
You presented yourself recently to the Iraq Study Group, to the Baker Commission, to which you refer. Can you paint that picture? What was it like, and what exactly did you tell them?
They called me on the phone. I was back in Phoenix and asked if I'd be eager to talk to them. They were there and we talked by telephone, so they had a speakerphone, so it was hard to tell some of the reactions. But Leon Panetta, for example, asked me, he said, every time we know that you think you need more troops, then the generals say they don't need more troops. What do you say to that? And I said, I say to that, ask them the question, how are things going? How are things going? What are the indicators? That the numbers of American soldiers killed is up, the number of attacks are up, the number of bodies found in the street in Baghdad is up. All the indicators are that it's going in the wrong direction. So to say that we have enough troops there simply does not comport with the facts on the ground. I understand how hard it is to be on one of these commissions, and I appreciate their hard work. Some very bright people. I just think that when you do these kind of things, it's almost a predictable result. And my dear friends, could I just say this to you in utmost sincerity? I would very much like to be President of the United States. I will make a final decision. I would make a final decision after sitting down with my otherwise reluctant family over the holidays, but I don't want to be President of the United States so much that I will take a position that I don't believe in when American lives are at risk. I understand the polls show that only 18% of the American people support my position, but I have to do what's right, what I believe is right, and what my experience and knowledge and background tells me is the right thing to do in order to save the situation in Iraq. All of us in this room either knows somebody or has a friend that knows somebody who has been killed or wounded in this conflict. It's tragic. It grips us all. It's the saddest thing in the world because this is our precious lifeblood. So we have to do what we believe is the right thing. Now, those who don't agree with me, I respect your opinion. Let's have a dialogue. But I don't believe that the facts on the ground indicate that the status quo is a satisfactory situation.
I want to ask you a question that I was asked on Hardball last week about you. And the question from Chris Matthews was, how can you account for the fact that Senator McCain's numbers continue to rise among both Republicans and the electorate generally, with an eye toward '08, and yet he appears to advocate a position diametrically opposite to what the country wants vis-a-vis Iraq? Now, I'll tell you, Senator, that my answer was because people respect the fact that John McCain has a plan, and that his plan is not the status quo. If you were on Hardball last week and asked that question about you, what would you have said?
Probably would say that I'm very fortunate. I'm probably the most fortunate man in America, that enough people know me that they know that even if they disagree with my position on a specific issue, they know it's an honestly held position and one that I believe in. And I think we should disagree on specific issues, but we should all, as I said at the beginning, we should respect each other's views. And I think a lot of Americans believe that those are honestly held views, and I will not go with the political winds to take the positions that I have taken.
Earlier this week on my program, and the folks who are here, I think know this, we spent a couple of days sort of dissecting a theory of mine that I'd love to hear you respond to. Stephen Hadley's memo that was critical of Prime Minister Maliki got a lot of attention and was outed in the New York Times. And I posed this theory. I said, is it possible that finally the White House is smart with the Times and deliberately leaked that memo so as to light a fire under Maliki's fanny? Is it possible that we're now finally telling the Iraqis, and maybe even using a deliberately leaked memo as our means of doing so, that they need to stand on their own 2 feet sooner than later?
Very rarely is a memo leaked from the White House by accident. I mean, that's just a historical fact. So I assume that may have been the intention to try to, just as you say, to put some pressure on Maliki and his government. You know, could I just mention one incident that was bitterly disappointing to me? You may remember a few weeks ago an American soldier was kidnapped, and we put checkpoints around Sadr City, the hotbed of the Mahdi army, and where al-Sadr, this very, very bad cleric, has his base of operations. And we were trying to put pressure on so we could rescue this American soldier who'd been kidnapped. And Maliki, as you remember, ordered that those checkpoints be lifted. My friends, that's not right. That's not right.
So how do you propose handling the Iraqi Prime Minister?
I hope that the President, in their private conversations, made it very clear to him that we expect a better performance. And I'm confident that this President did.
You'll have to indulge me. I want to read from Faith of My Fathers. And I know that you think you know this story, but it bears 60 seconds worth of my reading to make sure that we all know the story. These are the words of Senator McCain. I knew I was hit. My A4, traveling at about 550 miles an hour, was violently spiraling to earth. In this predicament, a pilot's training takes over. I didn't feel fear or any more excitement than I already experienced during the run, my adrenaline surging as I dodged SAMs and flak to reach the target. I didn't think, gee, I'm hit, what now? I reacted automatically the moment I took the hit and saw that my wing was gone. I radioed, I'm hit, reached up, and pulled the ejection seat handle. I struck part of the airplane, breaking my left arm, my right arm in 3 places, my right knee, and I was briefly knocked unconscious by the force of the ejection. Witnesses said that my chute had barely opened before I plunged into the shallow water of Truckbach Lake. I landed in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the city, in the middle of the day. An escape attempt would have been challenging. I came to when I hit the water, wearing about 50 pounds of gear. I touched the bottom of the shallow lake and kicked off with my good leg. I did not feel any pain as I broke the surface, and I didn't understand why I couldn't move my arms to pull the toggle of my life vest. I sank to the bottom again. When I broke the surface the second time, I managed to inflate my life vest by pulling the toggle with my teeth, and then I blacked out again. When I came to the second time, I was being hauled to shore on 2 bamboo poles by a group of about 20 angry Vietnamese. A crowd of several hundred Vietnamese gathered around me as I lay dazed before them, shouting wildly at me, stripping my clothes off, spitting on me, kicking and striking me repeatedly. When they had finished removing my gear and clothes, I felt a sharp pain in my right knee. I looked down. I saw that my right foot was resting next to my left knee at a 90-degree angle. I cried out, "My God, my leg." Someone smashed a rifle butt into my shoulder, breaking it. Someone else stuck a bayonet in my ankle and groin. A woman, who may have been a nurse, began yelling at the crowd and managed to dissuade them from further harming me. She then applied bamboo splits to my legs and my right arm. You're a guy who's been there, who certainly knows on this subject of how we should be treating those that we incarcerate during a time of war. Offer me your thoughts on that whole torture issue, if you would.
First of all, could I mention that it doesn't take a lot of talent to get shot down? I was able to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane, which is no mean feat. That was Robert Strange McNamara's way of winning the war, as you might recall. By the way, there's a little statue next to that lake where I was pulled out of, and it's amazing because this statue says on 26 October 1967, the famous air pirate Major, calling me a major in the Air Force. That's the most insulting thing of all since I was a Navy pilot. And so many people come by, and that it's sort of on the tour now in Hanoi. When people come to Hanoi, there's where McCain was shot down. I'm as well known in the street in Hanoi as I am in Phoenix. It's amazing. I just feel that one of the aspects of America that makes us different than other countries is that we do treat our captives according to the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions were signed in the late 1940s to set up rules for treatment of prisoners of war. We urged other countries to sign it, and we wanted it signed not so much for any other reason, but that we wanted our prisoners treated according to humane standards, as well as, obviously, we wanted to treat others the same way. One of the sustaining factors that my friends and I felt in Hanoi was that we knew that in America, we wouldn't do the things to our prisoners that were being done to us because we're a greater nation. I'd also like to point out one stark reality to you, my friends, and that is that Abu Ghraib has hurt our image throughout the world very badly. It's been shown 24/7 on Al Jazeera. And yes, these were a bunch of young people that were ill-trained and ill-disciplined, and they did the wrong thing. But we can't do these things and set ourselves above the enemy that we are facing. Otherwise, there's not much different. When we were going through this debate with some members of the administration, I'd like to tell you that we received letters from every former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 33 retired four-star generals and admirals who all said that took our position, that we can't abuse prisoners in ways that would be viewed as inhumane, because then the harm to our image in the world would negate any information that we might get. By the way, the Israelis don't torture people, and I am also convinced that the way you get information from people is not through inflicting pain, because if you inflict enough pain on someone, they'll tell you anything you want to know. I mean, that's just reality. So a lot of times when this kind of techniques are used, they get bad information from the people that they're captive, that are undergoing this abuse, as well as good information. The Israelis and good interrogators use entirely different techniques, and in the long run, the information they get is far more reliable and valuable.
Is it better to be fifth from the bottom or the anchor man? And please explain to these folks what I refer to.
You know, Michael always has to embarrass me a few times during the program.
You told it in the books.
I stood fifth from the bottom of my class at the Naval Academy. I must tell you, I really, and Michael asked if it's better to be the anchor man. The anchor man is the guy that stands at the bottom of the class. President Eisenhower spoke at my graduation. I'm that old. And the routine at that graduation was that they would give out the diplomas personally, the president, only to the top 100 people. The rest of us they would give a bundle, and then they would pass out the diplomas. Well, President Eisenhower, who stood around the middle of his class at West Point, insisted that he give personally the diploma to our anchorman in our class. So he got to come. Poindexter was #1 in my class. You might remember that name. So Poindexter came by, he gave him his diploma and left, and our anchorman came up, and President, I put his arm around him, shook hands with him, talked with him. I was so mad that I wasn't the anchorman. I didn't have a chance to meet the President of the United States.
One more from Faith of My Fathers. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, Senator McCain's father, a 4-star admiral. Senator McCain's grandfather, a 4-star admiral. First time, perhaps last time, in United States history, but hence the title of the book, which is extraordinary, Faith of My Fathers. A younger John McCain finds himself in Bath, Maine. It's the commissioning of the USS John S. McCain, named for your grandfather. Admiral Halsey is there. Would you mind telling that story?
Admiral Halsey, as many of you recall, was one of the great naval heroes of World War II. And he was an inspirational leader and one of the great, he just was one of the great naval heroes in World War II. He spoke at the commissioning of the ship, and at that time he was an older man, and he stood up to talk about my grandfather. The class of '04 and the class of '06 of the Naval Academy had approximately 30 to 40 graduates. So these guys knew each other for literally their entire adult lives. And he started to speak, and he couldn't speak, and he started crying, and he sat down. It was very, very touching. And then afterwards, at the reception they had afterwards from the commissioning, I went over to him and introduced myself. And of course, he said, son, what do you drink? Well, I was 16 at the time, and my mother was standing there, and I kind of stammered. He said, well, your grandfather drank bourbon and water, so get him a bourbon and water. So I was standing there with my mother's strong, disapproving look, and drank a bourbon and water with Admiral Halsey, one of the great naval heroes. It was great.
Senator McCain, what do you make?
By the way, I spoke at the commissioning of the USS Halsey, a destroyer, about a year ago over in San Diego, and it was a wonderful experience, and I retold that story, and his family members were there, and that was really the highlight of my speech at the commissioning.
Sir, what do you make of the poisoning story of Litvinenko? Now it seems like there's an Italian who is showing the symptoms, perhaps Litvinenko's wife. What's your thought?
My friends, for several years now, I have given speeches and talked about Mr. Putin and his inexorable, clear movement towards autocratic rule of Russia and a desire to restore the Russian Empire. I mean, it's very clear. When you look who he has surrounding him, old KGB apparatchiks that he worked with during the Cold War, when you look at his consolidation of power, when you look at him throwing people in jail, like Khodorkovsky, the oil guy, this is reminiscent, obviously, of the Cold War, when they came to London and jabbed the Bulgarian exile with the umbrella and poisoned him and killed him. Mr. Putin is putting enormous pressure on this little republic of Georgia, which has this young, dynamic 40-year-old president and is bringing democracy and freedom to Georgia. He's propping up the most Stalinist ruler in Europe, in Belarus, a guy named Lukashenko. It's a Stalinist government there. He's using the oil and energy weapon to intimidate his neighbors throughout the region. This is serious stuff. He has failed to cooperate with us on the Iranian nuclear issue. In fact, he has helped the Iranians acquire the technology for these nuclear weapons. So listen, I have the greatest respect and appreciation for this President of the United States. But I've never looked into Mr. Putin's eyes, but I don't have to. But I know that he is an autocrat, he's a dictator, and he is using oil money to undermine American interests in the world and the interests of freedom and democracy. Now, I want to say one other thing. What's the lesson here? The lesson here, my dear friends, is we have got to become energy independent. And we've got to ask the American people to support measures of conservation of ethanol and nuclear power in order to put us on a path to energy independence as quickly as possible. And I am convinced, there's one thing I know about the American people. If they are asked to make a sacrifice for the good of the nation and the good of the world and for the good of the next generation of Americans, they will do it. And we can appeal to the American people to take certain measures in order for us to make this nation energy independent. Real quick, you saw Tom Friedman's column yesterday or the day before. What he talked about is, why are we so dependent on what happens in the Middle East? We all know a variety of reasons, but one of them is because of our dependence on oil. Suppose that we were able to become oil independent. Suppose we were able to do that. Of course we would care what happened in the Middle East, because that would become a breeding ground for Al-Qaeda and terrorism. So of course we care, but at least we wouldn't be dependent upon our very livelihood on the stability in that part of the world. And I want to make one additional comment that I forgot to make at the beginning. When we lost the war in Vietnam, my dear friends, we came home. All we had to do was heal the wounds of war and try and help those veterans come all the way home. Some of them, unfortunately, still haven't been able to. But we worked on it, and that was our job. If we leave Iraq, I am convinced, if you read Zarqawi, if you read bin Laden, if you read these other guys, they're going to follow us home. It isn't just Iraq that they want. They want Saudi Arabia, and they want us. And this has now become part of the war on terror. And what would evolve in Iraq, in my view, after the chaos, I think would be a center of Muslim extremism and terrorist organizations if we fail there. So that's why I think so much is at stake in this conflict.
Let me just stay with the energy theme for a moment on a day that I think is going to be 60 or 65 degrees. The whole global warming issue. How does John McCain see it? Fact or fiction?
Climate change is real. I have traveled around the world, usually at your expense, to look at the effects of climate change. I've been to the South Pole. I've been to the northernmost place, Svalbard in Norway, up near the Arctic Circle. I've been to Greenland. I've been to the Brazilian rainforest. Climate change is real, my friends. And we're going to have to address it, because we do have future generations who are going to have to live in a world where, if we don't start reducing these greenhouse gas emissions, that we are going to terrible things are going to happen. Now, most opinion today accepts that fact. The debate is, how serious is it? There's a few that say it's a myth, but most scientists in the world today accept it as a fact. The question is, how serious? One of the reasons why I support ethanol now, when oil is $60 a barrel as opposed to $10 a barrel, it's clean. Nuclear is the cleanest. And by the way, my friend, I don't know if you know it or not, but our dear friends, the French, 80% of their electricity is generated by nuclear power. Now, I don't often like to imitate the French, but it seems to me, if they can do that, then we are capable of doing it as well. What's the answer? We got to either reprocess, or we have to find a place to store the nuclear waste. We could do either one or both if we have the national will to do so. I think climate change is real. We need to address it. We need to go to clean technologies. And I believe that we can do it by making convincing corporations in America that it is in their stockholders' financial interest to adopt green technologies. General Electric, the largest corporation in the world, is now got a total full-court effort to developing green technologies, and they're doing a pretty good job at it.
When we were last together, Senator, we spent a lot of time talking about Character is Destiny, your book, inspiring stories every young person should know and every adult should remember. My personal favorite in Character is Destiny is the homage that you pay to Pat Tillman. And you're very open in the book, and you've been very open with me and others in the past in saying, we didn't do right by Pat Tillman. There have been some stories written recently that have me concerned that maybe he was not the aberration, but that there could be a pattern there. I hope that's not the case. But how do you reflect on the way in which Pat Tillman was treated in passing and the extent to which perhaps other facts were manipulated concerning some of our fallen heroes?
There may be a few people in this room that don't remember the story of Pat Tillman. I know that most of you do. He was a brave young man who played for football as a walk-on at Arizona State University and then played for the Arizona Cardinals and was offered I think it was a $5 million contract to continue playing for the Arizona Cardinals, turned it down after 9/11 and joined the Army with his brother, and basically said, in his words, quote, "I haven't done a damn thing for my country and I want to do something." And of course, he was a Ranger. He was killed in Afghanistan. One of the terrible tragedies of war is there's always casualties associated with, quote, friendly fire. And we know now that that his own people killed him. His platoon was split up and they were in different places. It was getting dark, but it's still, the inexcusable part of it is the Army first portrayed his death as a result of enemy fire. His mother, God bless her, continued to ask questions about the circumstances surrounding his death. Mothers deserve to know the circumstances surrounding the deaths of their loved ones. And gradually, over a period of time, it came out that Pat Tillman was a victim of friendly fire. In no way did that diminish his heroism. In no way did it diminish the fact that he's one of our greatest heroes. But unfortunately, it put his family through enormous pain and frankly resulted in some bitterness, understandably, on the part of his family. We just can't do these things. We're still trying to figure out how this story came out the way that it did, and we'll continue to research it. Mistakes are made, but there seems to me there had been a point where the Army should have realized that this mistake was made and rectified it before we did. We love and cherish the institutions of the military. We love and cherish the men and women who serve it, but they're not perfect. They're not perfect, and they have to be held accountable, as all institutions of government are held accountable from time to time.
We're a long way from the Mexican border, and yet even here in the tri-state area, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, there have been some immigration battles. Is the fence going to be constructed?
I believe that we will construct a fence, particularly in the populated areas. In the populated areas along our border where the towns are right next to each other, we need to have a fence, and we need it very badly. And you've seen all the pictures of the holes in the barbed wire and people coming over, and we need to have that. But I would argue, my dear friends, 2 points. One, you don't need it in areas that are trackless deserts, such as many parts of the Arizona-Mexican desert. You can more efficiently and better surveil with UAVs and with sensors than you can with by just building a wall. And I think you also know, and the Israelis will tell you, if you build a wall and if the wall is not tended, people will dig under it, around it, or through it. So a wall doesn't always, and a wall will not seal. Again, the Israelis will tell you, they've tried to seal off the Palestinian area. Now they've done a pretty good job, but they still have people get through. The second thing is I want to mention to you, and I think this is important, as long as we have a system today where people can come to the United States illegally and be hired, we're going to still have people come here. You remember about 1/3 of the people who are here illegally are people who came here legally and overstayed their visas. I mean, they just came in with a visa, and then their visa expired, and they didn't leave. So we really need a temporary worker program. And the key to a temporary worker program is a tamper-proof biometric visa that can be obtained by someone in another country when he has a contract, he or she has a contract for a job here in the United States of America. He comes with a biometric tamper-proof visa, works, and finishes the work, goes back to the country that he or she came from. Today, small business people have people come to them with counterfeit Social Security cards, birth certificates, etc. You can't expect that small business person to be an expert on these issues. But under the plan that we have, if they come without the temporary visa and an employer hires them without it, then that employer should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. When the word gets south of the border that even if you come across our border, you can't get a job unless you have that document, they're going to stop coming. They're going to try to find other ways, legal ways, to get here. My dear friends, Americans want this issue resolved. They are frustrated. They are angered. No one is more frustrated than the people in my state. Over 50% of the people who cross the border illegally cross the Mexican-Arizona border because they've squeezed Texas and they squeezed California. We need to get this issue resolved. We deserve the American people deserve it, and the effects of it, as you all know, healthcare costs, law enforcement, you know all of the implications of it, and the frustration that Americans feel is fully justified. I believe that we have to have a temporary worker program that as part of any overall solution that we might achieve.
A political question, and then some of the questions suggested by the audience, and this is something that I touched on when we chatted earlier this morning.
Can you hear Michael okay still?
It's my view, Senator, that the Republican Party, is at a crossroads as we look toward 2008, and we need to make a determination as to whether we're going to be a party of ideologues or pragmatists. I consider myself to be a part of the latter category. The question for Senator John McCain is whether a non-ideologue can win the Republican nomination.
I think someone has to be grounded in the basic fundamental conservative principles of our party. By the way, here in Pennsylvania, I want to thank all of you for supporting Gerlach, who is a fine young man that we were able to return, and I'm sorry that Michael Fitzpatrick was not returned. So we had a tough election year here in Pennsylvania, and Rick Santorum also, I'm sorry we lost him. In 1976, we lost the presidency, we lost both houses of Congress, the Democrats had overwhelming majorities. We had just lost a war. There was assassinations, there was riots, there was demonstrations. We had a broken military because we just lost a war in Vietnam. And many people in America, particularly on the liberal side, believed that America's best days were behind us, and their Democrats thought that they were permanently in power and that we would have to move far to the left in America. There was one guy that I first heard about when I was in prison, who was the governor of California, who had a very different view of America and its future. He believed America's best days were ahead of us. He believed that America was going to win the Cold War, that this mutual assured destruction and the Berlin Wall could not stand. And he gave us hope and vision for the future. Now, was Ronald Reagan a rigid ideologue? No. I think if you look at his record, when he was governor of California, he even raised taxes. But he had a vision. He had a vision grounded in good fundamental conservative principles and an optimistic vision of the future and an unshakable faith in America and its citizens, in the unique role we played in history and will continue to play. So I believe that the message that we have out of this defeat, my friends, and we were defeated, is one, we came to power in 1994 to change government, and government changed us. We lost our way on spending. We've got to stop this unnecessary and wasteful spending that we have engaged in, and we've got to give Americans a much clearer view of our vision for the future of this country. We can do it. We will do it. I still believe America is a right-of-center nation, a more conservative nation than my Democrat friends are. And I think that if we learn the lessons, that we will prevail and we will again regain the majority.
Senator, I want to make sure that I acknowledge our general manager is David Yadgaroff, and we're all appreciative to David for making this a reality today. Our program director is Grace Blazer, who is next to David. Mike Baldini heads sales. Sandy Zubik is here from sales as well, and our entire sales team, and we appreciate them. Walter Kosh puts together all of our live events. Walter, we appreciate your efforts. Those of you who listen to the morning program in particular, I want to make sure that I acknowledge TC, who's the producer and answers your phone calls when you call. Next to TC is Greg Stocker. We searched him on the way in here today, and he's fine. He's allowed to shake hands with the senator now.
May I mention TC is the brains of the outfit. I'm sure many of you know that.
Can we go back to the fifth from the bottom question? I'm just kidding. Joan Jones does the news and is here in the front row. Ladies and gentlemen, there's Joan. That's the radio station. I want to make sure that I acknowledge, Senator, the folks here who have paid to be here this morning. All of the proceeds, you'll be, I'm sure, thrilled to hear this, benefit the USO's effort to help kids whose parents are serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Denny Shoup, DJ Stanhope, where are you? Please stand. We appreciate the USO very, very much. Thank you to our friends at the Hartford. We appreciate your sponsorship of this affair. Thank you, Joe Torsella and Tony Green, way in the back from the National Constitution Center. And ladies and gentlemen, you should know that the National Constitution Center is so proud to host Senator McCain here this morning that they're inviting all of you to tour the facility for free. All you need to do is take your John McCain ticket to the box office. They'll give you another one for the museum. And I would finally mention that next Wednesday night, we're back here with author Scott Turow, and we'd love to see you again. TC, you're ready with, you hand me the cards if you would, so I will look at the written questions, and you circulate, if you wouldn't mind, with the microphone. We have Senator McCain for 15 more minutes, so keep them short. We'll get in as many as we can. Questions for Senator McCain.
Could I mention, as he's looking through those real quick, the USO is one of the finest organizations in America. The work they do for our men and women in the military, and have done for generations, My father-in-law met my mother-in-law at a USO dance in World War II. He was a B-17 pilot. And if you look at the amount of these funds, percentage of these funds that go actually to helping and working with the men and women in the military, you'll be very proud of your support for the USO. And I want to thank you so much for being here today in behalf of that wonderful organization. And thank you for what you do.
This is more of a statement than it is a question, but I like it. It says McCain in the lead position with Rudy as a running mate.
Rudy Giuliani is a great American hero. Rudy Giuliani helped unite this nation after 9/11. I believe that he has a great place in American history, and he's a friend of mine. And if he runs, which apparently he will, I think he will make a very viable candidate. I really do. He's a remarkable man.
But there haven't been any discussions between the two of you to avert the fight and link up sooner than later?
No. Once a friend of mine said the Vice President of the United States has two duties. One is to vote in case of a tie vote in the United States Senate, and the other is to inquire daily as to the health of the president. So I'm not sure if that's something that he might seek. Could I also, you might remember in the last campaign there was some conversation, in the 2004 campaign there was some question about me being Vice President of the United States. Wasn't clear which party, but there was a conversation. And I was on a Jay Leno show, and Leno said, "Wow, Senator, what's this about you being Vice President of the United States?" I said, "You know, Jay, I spent all those years in a North Vietnamese prison camp, kept in the dark, fed scraps. Why the hell would I want to do that all over again?" Thank you, Michael.
Before we go to Mayor Bob McMahon's question, I wasn't going to bring up Senator Kerry, but I thought that he got the short end of the stick in that I believed him that it was a joke. I don't think that he would be so stupid as to say, if you don't work, if you're foolish, you're going to end up in Iraq. What was your take on that? What is your take today?
My take was that it was very wrong to say a comment like that that affects the men and women who are serving in the military. My take also was, as it was yours, you just apologize. All of us, everyone in this room, including this one, have made a misstatement, have said something that we regret. And my reaction to it was, just apologize. Americans accept apologies. They recognize that we're all human. And where I think, frankly, that Senator Kerry made a mistake was by not doing so. And that then, of course, fed the fires of controversy. I'm not going to recall to you, my dear friends, the missteps that I've made and the times I've inserted my foot in my mouth, but I have done it, and I have apologized. And I think that's Americans accept that, and that's where I think the mistake was made. And I'm sure, by the way, Michael, you saw that banner from Iraq, those kids in Iraq. That was incredible. Sir.
Senator, this week Nancy Pelosi did not appoint Jane Harman for Homeland Security, and I think you're familiar with the person she appointed, and it seems kind of scary to me, and I just wanted to know your comments on the appointment that she made.
It's hard for me to second guess Speaker Pelosi, and in the Senate, as you know, we work much more on a seniority basis than that kind of power vested in one person. I've worked with Jane Harman. I know her. I have seen she has enormous credentials on intelligence, and I'll regret very much that she is not the chairperson of the committee. Because of the nature of the conflict we're in today, which is obvious to all of us, intelligence has paramount importance. And so I regret that Jane Harman is not doing that job, but I am not really in a position to tell the Speaker of the House what she should do, except that we are all responsible for our actions that we take. So we'll see how Congressman Reyes, I do know Congressman Reyes, he's a fine man, and he's a good man. He was a former Border Patrol agent for many years, and I admire and respect him. He's a Vietnam veteran. So I hope he'll do a good job.
One of the written questions from the audience, did you support an amendment banning gay marriage?
Thank you, I did not. And here's why, because I'm a Federalist. We go in here and read the Constitution of the United States. It says all rights are reserved to the states. I used to know it verbatim. The states' fundamental principle of our founding fathers and federalism is that you do what you can within the states because the states are best government where the government's closest to the people. I supported a constitutional amendment to my state's constitution in the last election, which recognized the unique status and sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, and that is my firm conviction and belief. I believe that we should, and there was 8 other states, by the way, that had similar ballot initiatives. I believe the states should decide. I believe that before we amend the Constitution of the United States, we should exhaust those measures. And finally, I have said, if some activist court at a superior level says that states cannot make that decision, then I will strongly support a constitutional amendment to the United States of America. But in the meantime, I'd like to let the states make those decisions. And by the way, we only got 49 votes, so it's another reason. But let me also mention one other thing. Suppose this scenario, Michael, very quickly. Suppose we had a liberal Democrat president and a very heavily liberal Democrat Congress, and they decided that they would like to amend the Constitution of the United States to guarantee a woman's right to choose. You know the position I think we would take? I think we would say, let the states decide, because I don't believe Roe v. Wade was a good decision. I think it should be reversed. What would happen if Roe v. Wade were reversed? It would go back to the states, right? And that's where I think these decisions should be made, if at all possible.
I said to you as we were walking over here that my own view is that it's in the best interest of the party to take a page out of the Democratic playbook and be more inclusive and more big tent oriented. I mean, I want to have that debate on same-sex marriage within our party. I want to have the pro-life, pro-choice debate within our party and not exclude those folks who are of differing viewpoints. Does that make sense to Senator McCain?
Mick only not only makes sense, but it's stark reality. I think many of you know that very well, that we now have count them, one Republican congressman in all of New England, one, Chris Shays. Now, that's not, you can't regain and retain a majority if you write off one entire section of the United States of America. In California, we've got Schwarzenegger, but overall, it has become a heavily Democrat state. And I also want to sound one other note of warning to you. On the immigration issue, because the view of some Hispanics that we Republicans are anti-Hispanic, which we are not. Hispanics are pro-small business, pro-life, patriotic, religious, I mean, everything that Republicans are all about. And George Bush was able to get 45% of the Hispanic vote in 2004. That vote is now 70-30 Democrat over Republican. So we better address that aspect of the issue, particularly people that come from the part of the country that I do.
Good morning, Senator. Thanks for your service to our country.
Thank you.
With Republican control of the House, Senate, and White House, the president could have accomplished a lot over the last 6 years. And why did you undermine the president by taking so many positions with the opposition rather than working within the party structure to accomplish a consensus and forward that idea?
You have to give me some examples.
Well, I guess the judicial appointments was one. I think the torture was another. The torture issue, applying the Geneva Conventions to those who are not participants of the convention and don't, in my opinion, deserve that type of treatment.
Well, thank you. I'd like to address both of those very quickly. On the judicial appointments, I have not been more proud of anything that I've done than on the judicial appointments, because they were going to employ the, quote, nuclear option. They didn't have the votes, most likely, to have 51, and the whole Senate was going to be blown up. 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats got together in the so-called Gang of 14, and we got all the judicial appointments through. We now have the finest Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, I think, in history, in Judge Roberts, Judge Alito, a larger percentage of judges at the district and appellate court level than any time in history. We listed that as one of our accomplishments as we went into this elections. Now, there were those who wanted to blow up the Senate. There were those that wanted to say 51 votes prevail. We probably didn't have the votes, and the Democrats would have shut down the Senate. Instead, Republicans and Democrats agreed that we wouldn't filibuster unless there was, quote, extraordinary circumstances. So those 7 Democrats never agreed to filibuster, and we got all those judges through. It's still astonishing to me. It's astonishing that people criticize us for taking a step that got us 2 United States Supreme Court justices and a whole bunch of other judges that the president appointed. I'm amazed. On the torture issue, my dear friend, you'll have to talk to Colin Powell. You'll have to talk to all the former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You'll have to talk to those 33 3-star and 4-star generals. There was not one retired military officer that supported a position that would allow us to, quote, modify the Geneva Conventions so that, guess what? The Iranians could modify the Geneva Conventions to their liking, and maybe the Syrians, and maybe other countries, when they capture Americans, quote, modify the Geneva Conventions. We preserved the president's program, and we didn't, and we preserved his ability to interpret treaties under the Constitution, which is his right, and at the same time, we did not touch or modify the Geneva Conventions. You mentioned 2 of the areas that I am most proud. The people of Arizona did not send me to the United States Senate to be a, quote, rubber stamp. The people of Arizona sent me to represent them and their wishes and their desires and their hopes and their dreams. And the people of Arizona have supported me strongly. Those are the ones that vote for me or don't vote for me. So I am most proud of those two issues that you raised, which I had a respectful disagreement with the President of the United States, and then in both cases we were able to work it out and make progress in both of those areas. So I thank you. I appreciate your comment.
You know, I might add, this is what I respect so much about John McCain is even when I think you're wrong, by the way, one of those issues I don't agree with you on, but I respect your independence. And we've become too much, in my view, a party of partisanship and ideology. And I have to tell you, Senator, as I look at that whole Foley debacle and what went on in the House, in my opinion, those were individuals who put party ahead of protecting, you know, kids. I mean, they were more intent on re-election than they were blowing the whistle on some guys who needed to get thrown the hell out of there.
Yeah,
So
and
I applaud you even when I disagree with you.
Thank you, Michael. And could I just go back to one other point here, my friends? When I talk to our Republican faithful, and many of you are in this room, and I ask, how many here have heard of the bridge to nowhere? Everybody's heard of the bridge to nowhere. A $233 million bridge in Alaska to an island with 50 people on it. And that's your tax dollars. That's the taxes that you pay when you go to the gas pump and fill up your tank. That's your money, it's not ours. We could have bought Learjets for all of those 50 people for less money than so our Republican base, our faithful, our people that go out and work for us day after day, week after week, we're so upset about this spending situation. That's why I meant where we lost our way. We've got to get back to saving. We're bankrupting America. Our children and our grandchildren are going to pay a debt in the form of Social Security and Medicare that just, my favorite pork barrel project, and I got a lot of them, but my favorite, the $3 million we decided to spend, $3 million to study the DNA of bears in Montana. Now, I don't know if that was a paternity issue or a criminal issue, but you know, you can't make it up. You can't make it up.
Question from the audience.
Hi, I'm a 17-year-old junior, and I'll probably be voting in the next election. I recently read your open letter to Barack Obama condemning his lack of bipartisanship, I think. I was just wondering, what Democrat do you hold enough respect for? Who would you like to run against in the next election?
I'd just like to make a comment about Senator Obama. He's a charismatic, hardworking, very dynamic young senator. He and I had come to an agreement on ethics and lobbying reform, and then he had done something that I didn't like, so in my usual calm style, I fired off a letter to him. We resolved that, and we moved on. I have great respect. Majority of the men and women I serve with in the Congress are honorable people, and I respect them, and many of them are friends of mine, and good friends. Joe Lieberman is one of my best friends in the United States Senate, and I might point out that if this election had been all about the Iraq War, Joe Lieberman could never have been reelected. Americans are conflicted and frustrated, but most Americans don't want to just pull out. You see what I mean? And so I think there are many people like Joe Lieberman and others who I've had a great privilege of working with in a bipartisan fashion. Michael and I were talking before the show. There was a thing, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, that on exit polls, voters couldn't think of a single accomplishment of the Congress. Well, the way you accomplish things in the Senate is you work together on issues that don't deserve partisanship. We've got to sit down together, Republicans and Democrats, and fix Social Security, because present-day workers are not going to have the same benefits that present-day retirees is. Just a fact. So I can sit down with a guy like Joe Lieberman and say, Joe, come on, let's work with the president, and he'll do that. One of the most disappointing things to me recently was when the President of the United States, you probably remember this, gave a State of the Union message last year and said, I regret that we were unable to reform Social Security, and the Democrats stood up and cheered. They cheered that we were unable to fix Social Security? What's that about? That's a commentary on how partisan it's become, that we won't work together. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan stood together in the Rose Garden, said, we're going to fix Social Security, and they did for about 40 years or so, which is about the attention span of most Congresses. But so we've got to do things better. I think that you have to, in direct answer to your question, I think you have to assume that Mrs. Clinton will probably be, Senator Clinton will probably be the nominee of the party. But I'm not that familiar with how the Democrat Party works to make an informed judgment. I think that this Senator Obama has certainly attracted a lot of attention from Democrats and others.
2 questions left for Senator McCain. TC?
Yes, Senator, thank you very much. You must have been reading my mind. What happened to the days when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill's, as they would say, you know, we can disagree, we can argue, and at 6 o'clock, let's go out and have a drink together and settle these issues. Where is this hatred coming from? I mean, I listened to Senator Kennedy, and I mean, you can see the hatred against President Bush. You can see these other senators and congressmen. Where is this hatred coming from? Why is it? Why can't we work together? I mean, I have friends that are Democrats. We sit and we talk. We're still friends. But we see Congress and we see the Senate, this hatred. Where is this coming from? How can we resolve these issues where the Republicans and the Democrats can all work together for the common good of the country?
I think about it and worry about it all the time. I think one of the answers is gerrymandering, where you basically give people lifetime seats. And so therefore they tend to go more to the extreme position. As you know, this was a big wave. You know, there was a change really of 60 seats out of 435. Most experts, I think you would agree, Michael, about 300 to 350 of those seats are absolutely not going to change hands because of gerrymandering. People need competition. They need to have the kind of competitive races that brings out the best in all of us. Could I tell you real briefly, one of the most touching things that I have read in many years, about 6 months ago, I think it was in the Washington Post. There was a guy who had been a very close associate of President Reagan. When President Reagan was shot, he was in the hospital in Georgetown. And this guy, his name was Max Friedersdorf, was assigned to sort of keep people out of the hospital room because President Reagan was in very bad shape, as you know, when he was first shot. Tip O'Neill came to the room. He knelt, he prayed, he cried for President Reagan, because he loved President Reagan, but he also loved the country. And he knew how important it was for us to have President Reagan be alive to lead the country. Now I don't know if we'll ever go back to that kind of thing, but certainly shouldn't that be an object lesson to all of us? And I disagreed with everything that Tip O'Neill ever said, just about, because he was a liberal Democrat, but he was a great man, and when it came time to act in the national interest, he did. And those people, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, should be an example to all of us.
Good morning, Senator. I just wanted to go back to this idea on the Mexican border problem, people infiltrating like they are. To me, and I would imagine a lot of people in this room, that's one of the most important issues, as you sort of said yourself in your remarks. And the thing that bothers me about temporary work visas, how do we get rid of these people when the temporary work visas are up? We've had people temporary work visas in the past, and they're here now. It expires. Nobody does anything about it. They get rid of them. We have to get them back to Mexico where they belong. We can't afford this.
Yes, sir. This visa, the way it would work, if an American advertised a job for 60 days in every way, including over the internet, and no American citizen came to take that job, then he could enter into a contract, and there will be organizations who set this up with that worker, and he has a contract for a certain period of time, and he comes to the embassy and gets this visa by showing him that contract, which is validated. That visa is only good for the length of time that he enters in that contract. If that employer hires that person or keeps them on the job past the length of that contract, then that employer is subject to prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. And I think that if you talk to most experts, that's a workable solution. I was with the governor of Mississippi day before yesterday. He said they would not have been able to rebuild the Gulf Coast if it had not been for the Hispanic workers. I mean, it's just a fact. I've met in Yuma, Arizona today, where 80% of the fresh produce that supplies our country is grown in the winter. The people have come to me and said, we're not going to be able to harvest these crops because we can't get workers. There is a place for it, but I also, again, want to say I understand your frustration, I understand your anger, and I really believe that if we're going to sell any temporary worker program or any way to address the issue of the 12 million people who are here illegally, we have to assure them that we won't repeat the mistake of the 1980s where we gave amnesty to millions of people and we said we would secure the border, and we didn't. And that's why you are so frustrated and why so many other Americans are. And in my state of Arizona, where the emergency rooms are flooded, where the, it's just, I won't burden you with our sorrows, but we really do feel the impact of this in my home state as much as any place else in America. I thank you.
You've been very, very gracious with your time. I'm very appreciative. I want to close on a note about the times in which we live. You met my three sons, and they're in the front row today, and it's a subject that
Thank God they take after their mother.
There was a section in Faith of My Fathers titled Fifth from the Bottom that I wanted to just go back to. Living in dangerous times, in Why Courage Matters. By the way, my audience knows I'm an avid reader. You've written some tremendous books, and if you want more from our special guest, I recommend them all. I happen to love Character is Destiny. From Why Courage Matters, there was this, and maybe you'll give us a thought about living in these dangerous times. The idea for this book came from our creative editor, John Karp. He thought I might have something useful to say in an essay on courage. The concept began to germinate in his imagination in the weeks after September 11, when people were afraid to ride elevators to the higher floors of tall buildings or get on airplanes, when many thought their entire sense of well-being had been permanently compromised. He thought I could encourage people to find the fortitude to get on with their lives by writing a manual of courage, so to speak. Several talk show hosts in the weeks just after September 11 also thought I might possess some insights. Well, they're wrong. I'm not trained in psychoanalysis. I don't know what to tell people to quiet those kinds of anxieties. Get on the damn elevator. Fly the damn plane. Calculate the odds of being harmed by a terrorist. It's still about as likely as being swept out to sea by a tidal wave. Watch the terrorist alert and go outside again when it falls below yellow. Suck it up, for crying out loud. You're almost certainly going to be okay, and in the unlikely event you're not, do you really want to spend your last days cowering behind plastic sheets and duct tape? The world according to John McCain.
A little straight talk. If I could leave you with one final thought. First of all, two final thoughts. One, thank you, Michael, for all you do. God bless you, and thank you for adding to the respectful debate and dialogue in America. The one thing I believe more than anything else about America, and I know you share that view, otherwise you wouldn't be here this morning. If Americans are asked to serve and to sacrifice for the benefit of their fellow Americans and future generations of Americans, they will do so. I think one of the mistakes we made after 9/11 was we didn't ask more Americans to make more of a sacrifice. We told them to go shopping or take a trip. I believe that the greatness and strength of America is displayed every moment of every day by these brave young Americans who are serving us in Iraq and Afghanistan. putting their lives on the line for somebody else's freedom. And whenever I get a little depressed and whenever I get a little unhappy or a little bleak about the future, I go and see these young people out at Walter Reed or Bethesda or someplace else in America. And believe me, my dear friends, they are so wonderful and they are so great. And America's future being in their hands can give us great confidence. And thank you for your wonderful support of them. And thanks to the USO.
Ladies and gentlemen, I neglected to mention Dr. Maz, Anthony Mazzarelli waved so everybody sees Maz. These 500 people bought all the tickets within 2 hours. It was like a U2 concert. United States Senator John McCain, ladies and gentlemen.